Hello again, everybody. I'm Taryn, also known as Big Bison T on the various selling, fan, and forum websites. Today I'm coming to you to talk about the pulse rifle, but not just any pulse rifle. This one has long been a personal grail of mine, not because it has electronics or movable parts, but this is actually a cast off a screen-used Stunt rifle. So I was able to purchase this kit from Yorkshire Props on Facebook. Found out about this through the Aliens Legacy and various Facebook groups online that they were making these. I ordered it as an unfinished kit. I did a fair amount of filling and of course my own paint. I believe Yorkshire Props does offer a painting service. As of the posting of these videos, these are still available for purchase now. Now most of you are asking, why does it look so goofy? Why does it not look like the interpretation from the other pulse rifles that we've seen? Well, that is a fun story. To look back at the original screen-used rifles, it's important to understand that they were not the same. Each one was a little different. There were as many as 8 hero rifles, meaning blank firing, live action Thompsons. Only one of the rifles actually had functional, as in a Remington 870 inside the grenade launcher. They're all a little different. After filming, they were disassembled, most of them, and others modified for use as a rental item. So the surviving screen rifles that people see today are not how they looked on screen. In fact, most of the ones today are reassembled rifles from the random parts using not 1986 accurate techniques such as riveting plastic vacuum formed shrouds back onto the rifles. Rivets were not used like that. Welding vents on. All these reassembled rifles were made for the filming of Alien 3, and that's what you see surviving today. The 1986 rifles did not survive in their screen use form to today at all. Bapti, I believe, still has the only one guts that had the functional grenade launcher in them. All the rest were still live fire Thompsons, but have been reassembled for use in Alien 3. So that's why you can't trust anything you see today from a surviving rifle. Now, as we see in the armory scene from this photo, there were 16 total rifles that we know about, at least 8 of which had to have been Stunts. The Stunt rifles got the most screen time of any, and because of the unique features of all the rifles, including heroes and Stunts, once you know what you're looking for, it's actually really easy to spot which is which on screen. Now, with so many variations, it is actually a pretty hotly debated topic of which is the most correct, the most accurate. A lot of the replicas nowadays do kind of an idealization, a mixture of the best features of all of them. So the most common you see is what I call the ideal 8. It is an 8-hole in the front vent, live action Thompson, but dummy filled grenade launcher, as seen in this photo. And of course the one with 10 holes is the one that we see Frost with in the armory, racking the slide and placing it on the table. And most famously, it is the one that Hicks trains Ripley on. So even though it is not without its flaws, like not having a front sling mounting point and a weird magazine well curved plate to account for the actual functional trigger, as well as a few other things, that's for another topic perhaps. But the point is, it is certainly iconic. It's certainly got its close-up time, and it is certainly deserving of, to be in the argument for the best of most iconic pulse rifle. So with such great options, you would think one of those 2 rifles would be what they would mold in order to produce the Stunt rifles. For some reason, you would be dead wrong. They actually used, I don't even know how it got that way, but one of the heroes had its vent installed too far forward so that the back of the barrel was exposed, the whole thing overhung the front. It was a really kind of goofy looking rifle, but it's screen accurate. It was screen used. And for whatever reason, when they decided to use that one to make the Pulse, that brings us back full circle, the Stunt Pulse, with its forward overhanging barrel vent. Among the other features, besides the clear forward vent, is these had especially narrow and long magazine front plates. The magazine bases themselves were a bit longer, where most of them were just a rectangle shape. This one comes up and then in before it, shuts off. So that's kind of interesting. In any scene where you can see the back bottom here painted brown, it's because the shrouds were a little lower. Usually this is all Thompson and it's all black on any of the blank firing ones, but any of the casts, whoever was painting them, painted over the gun part with the same brown as the shrouds. So you can recognize them in the racks. Whenever you see this brown base on the bottom, you know that's a Stunt in the racks. So there's a whole lot of unique fun features on this thing. Once you know what you're looking for, once you've seen it, you won't be able to unsee it. These ugly suckers are everywhere. And that is why this kit is awesome. So let's get into the kit. As for the specs itself, it is a fiberglass slush cast, so it's pretty sturdy. It goes between 3 and 5 millimeters, depending on how the resin all settled in the slush cast. So it's pretty thick walls, and it feels very sturdy. Whole thing weighs in at about 5 pounds, almost on the nose, at least according to my scale. The one thing you might say it's missing, if you want to add sling points, I think it's strong enough to do that, and I believe I'm going to attempt it. But for the most part, it's kind of like when you decide how much you want to finish this, it's kind of like a balancing act, because a lot of it is imperfect, but a lot of it is imperfect because it was cast off of an imperfect screen used item. I want to retain as much of the screen used, what do you call them, flaws. The screen use flaws I want to remain, but I'd like to fix the obvious stuff. So you can see here, it's shipped primed, ready to paint. Now Yorkshire Props did offer a painting service. I declined. I asked for just the prime because, for one, I would like to do some filling and sanding myself. Not that I don't trust other people to do that, but I trust me more, no offense. And the other thing is because I actually have a tin of original Brown Bess colored paint. And I've been sort of sitting on it, saving it, because it's the original formula from the 80s, and it is still liquid. And I've been trying to think of something really cool to use it on, and I think this fits the bill perfect. So I've got my own paint plans for this. Now, before we get into that, I am going to want to, as we discussed, address some of the flaws. He did ship it primed, and you can see here a lot of white flecks. That is because I have been going in and chipping off positive air bubbles. Obviously, there's going to be some spots where you got negative air bubbles that I'm going to want to fill. Other parts that are sticking up that I'm going to want to sand off. So I am going to go in here with, I don't know how well some of these flaws are showing. I'm going to fill the stuff that is obvious. A lot of it, may have been original flaws being filled, from the original cast of the Hero mold to the Stunt mold. So I don't want to go overboard. But if something's especially nasty and easily fixed with just some simple contour putty and sanding, I'm going to go ahead and do that and smooth out what I can. I'm not going to try to rebuild or reshape anything. I'm just going to fill in the ugly pock marks, basically, is the goal here. And then I'm going to do my own painting from there. Overall, just from a straightness point of view, there is some slight warping in here. I do not at all fault this to Yorkshire Props. To me, this seems like something that using an imperfect Hero model, throwing it in a mold, and is probably a result of that process. The kind of imperfections here is exactly the kind of imperfections that I fully expect to have been present on the screen used Stunt, because they were kind of, as we've covered, kind of sloppy and awful. So I don't think this is anything I can live with. I'm not going to do any massive structural changes like I just said. Fill, I'm basically just using a regular off-the-shelf Testors filler putty. Just popping into the little holes where I see them. Just put it in, wipe it smooth. When I sand it and paint it and reprime it, I fully expect all this stuff to be virtually non-existent. This is not complicated or fancy work. The only thing I will say that if, there's, find an example of a big one that is possibly, well, let's say this for example. This is kind of mangled. I'm going to kind of grind off some of the, dig out some of the primer, try to get down to the resin underneath, just sort of scratch it before I fill it. And I'm not going to go overboard trying to make it perfect. I just want it better than it is, you know what I mean? So if you wanted to obsess over every tiny little pockmark, you could be here all day. And I don't want to do anything big scale. So this is another example. This one's fairly deep. Just going to get in there, get it back down to the bare resin white. So just this little thing here, it's going to be a little tedious, but I think it'll pay off in the long run. I'm just going to do that to basically the rest of the entire rifle, front and back. Got it pretty filled and pretty sanded. It's a lot smoother than it was. I've got a lot of the gaps filled better than I think they were. And I'm ready. I'm just going to paint it. So this is going to be the fastest part because there is literally no assembly. Just sanding out all the little bits and pieces was the hard part. Trying to get into the nooks and crannies and smooth some of that stuff out. I'm going to hit the whole thing with black, matte black. I'm going to hit the whole thing with a protective dull coat. And then I'm going to hit just the handle and the slide grip with some satin black, just so it looks a little different, like, you know, it's not made of the same material, metal versus plastic. And then I'm going to most likely airbrush on my original vintage brown Bess. And just hit it with a couple coats of black. About to go in with the dull coat. Nothing crazy yet. All right, I got my original pre-super enamel vintage Umbral Matte 170 brown Bess. I've mixed it for an airbrush using generic paint thinner at a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 paint to 1 thinner. I'll mix it up one last time, dump it into my little handy dandy airbrush gun, and hope for the best. Alright, that went on as good as can be expected. It's not quite dry yet. You see where I went a little heavy in some spots, but that is exactly the color I want. It does look a little chalky, which is fine, especially if you consider, you know, real life camouflage applications. But I think I actually am going to hit it with a dull coat and just hope the color shift doesn't happen too much. A lot of times when chalky colors get hit with a clear top coat, it saturates them, but I think it changes the color. I think I'm going to give it a risk it and hope that it even gets a little bit more of a stronger color, because I'm not sure I like the chalkiness. But in any case, I used about 7 milliliters of paint to cover this, which is about half a tin. There are 14 milliliter tins, the size that I showed earlier. And I don't know if I went overkill or if that's about normal, but just a heads up, you're going to need at least half a bottle if you got the original vintage stuff. So as I'm looking over my collection, of course I love my sort of semi-hero build with the functional metal parts and things like that. But you know, I also just really love this little bit of unique history. It's just so weird that it's awesome, in my opinion. Hopefully people can appreciate things that are not necessarily perfect, but as long as they're accurate and they've got an interesting story behind them, they can still be a heck of a lot of fun, which is why this is definitely one of my favorite props in the entire collection at this point. Love this ugly little sucker. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like it, be sure to hit like, subscribe for more stuff like it. Doing all kinds of props, not just aliens. Of course, aliens lean a lot of times. But thanks for watching.